I often run into, I don't want to call them conflicts, but I run into confusion with people who have trouble wrapping their minds around my decision to change. Looks like there's an accident and they're right in the middle of the lane, so bear with me a moment. Oh, go ahead, you're pulling out anyway. Wow, just stopped right in the middle of the highway. Fantastic. These individuals who know me pretty well have trouble wrapping their minds around my dietary decisions. And to me at this point, everything makes perfect sense, obviously. If it didn't make sense, I wouldn't be doing it. But I also am backed with a lot of knowledge that I have obtained over the time that I've made my decision. And that is knowledge that these individuals do not have. So they are lacking in that, and that's why there's confusion. When you know what I know, it makes sense. That's the boiled down version. But I've thought about it in trying to figure out how could I efficiently explain it to someone without having to basically teach them that I've had to teach myself for the past few months. How do I boil it down to where it makes sense to them, to where they say, oh, I see. And it really comes down to two factors. In the beginning, I was doing my very best to do the right thing. I was basing my decisions based on ethics, which, as everyone knows, ethics is a very complicated subject. The minute you bring ethics into anything, there will be confusion, there will be a lot of back and forth. It's all a major mental mind game. All debates are based on them. So that's where I was having a lot of trouble in the beginning. I was a flexitarian because I was trying my best to do the right thing, but I just couldn't bridge the gap because I kept finding conflicts within myself. For instance, I understood the way I felt was real. When I see death, I feel a certain way, and I can't deny the feeling. I cannot deny feeling wrong, if that makes sense to you. And you shouldn't deny the feeling. Emotions are not there so you can ignore them. They're there so you can reflect and find out what it is that's bothering you and causing the emotion. So the point is not to pretend that it doesn't upset you, which is what everyone seems to do. Everyone loves to pretend that certain things don't bother them. And I was doing my best to do the opposite. I was trying my very best to find out why. Why does this bother me? And it's tricky. It's really not easy to answer. And as I wrote in an email, I remember stating, every time I think I have it figured out, I go to feed my dog and I'm confused again. The problem with basing everything on ethics was I was missing major facts. The ethics problem I was having was, if it's wrong for me to eat meat, why is it okay for my dog? Why is it okay for wolves? Why is it okay for any other predator on the planet? And this is where ethics was really tying me in a knot. I just couldn't figure out why one had the right and the other did not. My epiphany came when I began doing my research on nutrition. Nutrition filled the gaps that ethics could not. And this is when things started to make sense, and I started making serious changes. So it's not that before I didn't care. I cared a lot. I just couldn't justify everything. I just ran into one conflict after another. Why do I have the ability to eat meat if I'm not supposed to, for instance? And nutrition has an answer for that. Consuming animals is for survival purposes only. And this is by nature, by God, however it calls to you. This is the way it works nutrition-wise, or at least for human beings. I'll say that. I'm not going to try to claim any other species because I just don't have the research for them. I have the research for humans. In the human body, the consumption of others is based on survival purposes because it turns out it's a part of nature/God's checks and balances. The more consumption of animals, the higher the rate of disease. This is nature's or God's checks and balances. The same happens with sex. I mean, we know this. It doesn't mean that sex is bad. It's just you get to a point to where you breed disease, basically. You're abusing the fact that it is there, again, for survival purposes, and you are abusing that fact, and you will pay the consequence. I'm not saying that anyone who has a disease is justified. I'm not at all saying that. Everyone who does not know any better is completely innocent, so don't take it that way. But this is the reality. The reality comes in many different forms. There are so many studies, human and animal, proving, and I mean proving without a doubt, proving that with the more we consume of others, the higher the rate of disease. It's just, I want to say it's a fact. I mean, in science, you really can't, because there is always a reason for it not to go 100% the way that it should. There will always be that one person who smoked their whole life and didn't get lung cancer, but you really can't look at the evidence and say that everyone will survive. But clearly that is not the case. There is always an exception to the rule. This happens in health just as it happens in language, just as it happens with just about anything else. There's always an exception. So I'm not counting the exceptions here. Exceptions are exceptions. They are rare. Please don't come into my lane. You look like you were. Okay. People are driving crazy because there's traffic. So, let's not worry about exceptions. They happen. We're talking about the average on the bell curve. We're talking about the masses here. I'm not saying because this Olympic runner can run at this speed, why can't you? Clearly, they are an exception to the populace. Not everyone can achieve that. So there's my my way of making you understand why I'm excluding exceptions. It's unrealistic. So for the masses, it shows without a doubt. Cancer, for instance, grows the more animals you consume. The less you consume, the more that it shrinks until it disappears. When you do not consume animal products whatsoever, it cannot exist. It dies. So that's what I'm getting at. This is my proof. And so it occurs to me and I say, okay, I get it. So the reason we have the ability to consume other beings, other sentient beings, is because clearly nature or God wants us to live. And in those survival situations, it says, do what you have to do to survive. Let's just get past this point And once we do, let's just move on. So really that's what it is we have the ability to save ourselves. So we'll eat an animal, even though it's a lesser form of food, it is still a food source. We can eat it and survive, and so that's what we are meant to do. However, it is by no means nutritious, and I mean that when you are balancing the negative and positive, in the end it balances out to be negative. Although there are some nutritional factors, it does provide a good source of protein. Protein really isn't, I don't want to say not that important. All nutrients are important. That's why you need them. They're essential. But in the scope of things, you really need a very small amount of protein, a lot less than you would think, versus other nutrients that really you need a lot of. So in comparison, it's really not as essential as you would think. So that being said, animals do not possess fiber, which is absolutely essential. They do not possess other vital nutrients that we need. Only plants do. And so this is where the checks and balances come into play. You are supposed to be eating what is nutrient dense. The things that have the most nutrients for you, which are plant-based. And in survival situations, when they are scarce or not available, then you eat other life forms. And this makes perfect sense in the balance of the natural world. If food is scarce, it's scarce. Listen, it's just not there. You cannot fabricate it out of thin air. So it would make sense that you would have the ability to consume others to reduce the numbers. And so that is the balance, the natural balance in nature. So I'm able to look at my own health and say, okay, clearly you can look at my teeth, you can look at my lack of claws, you can look at many different aspects of my physical body and deduce that I was meant to eat plants. I have dexterous, sensitive fingertips that are excellent for picking fruit, especially very small things. And really, these are not the hands of a killer, obviously. Neither are my canines, which are hardly visible. I will not be ripping and tearing through meat with these teeth. It will be very difficult for me. However, they're excellent for grinding and chewing. So, that being said, physically speaking, it makes perfect sense. And now that I have the data, the scientific data on human studies, we're not talking about rats, what works for rats, because those are the ones that are actually askew. The human studies show that we are meant to eat plants. We only have the ability to eat animals for survival purposes. And so that is how I've come to my conclusion, and that's how I was able to come to, I'm not going to say my final destination, but to my destination of now being vegan, is now the ethics are backed. Because unfortunately, ethics alone is just not enough. And it is unfortunate, but I do believe that I am not alone. I believe that there are many, many people who feel exactly the same way, because, hey, in the end, you don't want to cut yourself short. And I sympathize with that. So understand that you, in this case, can have your cake and eat it too. You can do the ethical thing. You can be merciful and nourish yourself at the same time. You don't have to sacrifice. In fact, you will be better off. But don't take my word for it. You're more than welcome to research it. And if I remember, I will post links at the bottom of this video so that you can do that and make your own decision.